like clock. I can't stop. Fuck around, make my 40 pop. No popcorn, I pop pistols, reaming my body.
Alright guys, not gonna lie, this video might be a little bit rushed because the Boruto manga is literally coming out in about, I'd say 35 minutes from now. By the time this video actually does go up, I'll link the chapter in the actual description below, so if you guys do want to find where you can read chapter 53 of the Boruto manga, you guys can go there. But regardless, this episode right here was definitely probably one of the best episodes of Boruto all time. Not necessarily because there's a lot of action in this episode, but of course because we got to see a lot of the face reveals from a lot of the characters in the Kado organization. Now, there was a lot of discussion about the designs, especially around characters like Delta and Jigen. Now, we finally get to see the characters in multiple frames and we could kind of form a very good description, a very good idea of them. Now, of course, I do want to say it's not going to be 100% consistent throughout all the episodes, mainly because the episodes are illustrated by different people. But regardless, in this particular episode right here, I was really worried, and a lot of people were really worried about Delta. But I'm not gonna lie to you guys, Delta in this episode looked absolutely fine. She looked fine. It doesn't necessarily look like a one-to-one comparison to her in terms of the Boruto manga. This Delta design looked a lot better than what we see in the Boruto preview of last week, and I'm 100% fine with the character of Delta. I think a lot of you guys feel the same way that I do as well. I ain't gonna lie to you guys, we were really worried for a second. Now, Delta's overall personality, I love it, man. I love it. Delta is extremely feisty, and we got that sense from the Boruto manga as well. She threatens everybody, she barely likes anybody, she basically feels like she's the biggest person in the room. And of course, she probably is, mainly because she's definitely fine. I'm not gonna lie, every single episode that Delta's in is probably gonna be a highlight for me, and I'm pretty sure it's gonna be a highlight for a lot of you guys as well. Amado's design, it looks good as normal. In last week's review, I did kind of say that Amado had the best design. Not necessarily now, mainly because Delta's design looks way better, but regardless, Amado's design looks absolutely good. Now, Jigen's design, in my opinion, looks a little bit more interesting. Coming into the Boruto anime, I didn't necessarily expect much from Jigen's design, mainly because in the Boruto manga, he doesn't necessarily look that crazy because he just looks like a regular person. Of course, he was a monk before this. I'm not necessarily going to get into a whole bunch of spoilers, but you guys understand, he wasn't necessarily anything too crazy and anything too outward. The real time that we are going to judge Jigen's design is, of course, when he does activate the karma seal, and of course, goes into the latter stage 2 of the karma seal. That right there specifically is going to be when Jigen's design takes on a whole brand new meaning. It's probably going to be one of the best designs of Boruto all time. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you guys, in the last scene that I did see Jigen, he looked really impressive. He looks really impressive. It just looks weird, it looks creepy, it just looked like he's a boss just sitting in that chair. Now, there was like an OST, there's like a sound, it sounded really weird. Specifically, this right here is what I'm talking about. I think at first I'm not going to like it just because of the fact that it's not necessarily something that I'm completely familiar with, but I think as time goes on, I'm probably going to warm up to it a lot more, and because of that, I think it's super interesting. But what's also crazy is the fact that Victor's supposed to be like the overall big theme of this whole episode, and in my opinion, I think that Victor's probably like one of the more uninteresting things about this episode, just because of the fact that we've already gotten used to Victor, and we know what Victor's outcome is going to be. For the people who actually did read the Boruto manga, we already know exactly what's going to happen to Victor, but in this episode, I do have to talk about it. I just have to talk about it. So first things first, I think this is a sad situation for Victor. Now, even though we know that he's pretty much like a corrupt old man, it just seems like a sad situation, mainly because Victor, he basically loves life. He wants to keep living. He wants to do everything that he possibly can to keep his body alive. And it just seems like every single step of the way, his plan is just completely backfiring. Like, he had the blimp. He basically snuck into Jigen and Amado's conversation. He finally thinks that he possibly has a way to actually complete the situation, then out of nowhere, bang, the blimp completely crashes. It just seems like an overall sad situation for my man Victor. Now, as I said, the people who did actually read the Boruto manga, we've seen how this whole situation ended. I just really hope when this situation actually does happen, we see a little bit more of like a, I should say, inner thoughts of Victor and him basically figuring out like, hey, he had a very long life and he should actually be happy. But I'm not gonna lie, I was really kind of surprised that the blimp actually came from Victor. What we understand right now is the fact that Amado was probably like one of the best scientists of all time in terms of compiling information. For the people who aren't necessarily that familiar with Amado, this isn't necessarily any type of crazy spoilers, because it did kind of make it very clear in this particular episode right here that Amado right now is a scientist. But what sets Amado aside from everybody else is the fact that Amado doesn't necessarily just rely on his knowledge and his intel alone. I'm pretty sure a lot of other scientists do that as well, but in terms of the up-to-date knowledge, in terms of ninja technology, he's basically compiling. He basically takes from everybody and then he puts that work into his own. It's really confusing though how he's not necessarily able to fix Victor. The one thing that I could possibly say about Victor is the fact that Victor's body right now, it is extremely old, and I'm pretty sure he possibly can't necessarily undergo extremely long and lengthy surgery. So I feel like that right there could possibly be the reason why Amado can't necessarily fix up my man's Victor. Now, another thing that we did find out in this episode is the fact that the Kado organization doesn't really like each other. And I feel like it's very similar to what we see in the Akatsuki. In the Akatsuki, there was a lot of people that didn't necessarily like each other. There was a lot of people that didn't necessarily trust each other. In fact, what we did understand is that Kakuzu himself, he basically said that he couldn't necessarily stop himself from killing a lot of his teammates. And that's why he pretty much had a teammate that was immortal and Hidan, which is absolutely hilarious. But regardless, in this particular situation, you see the exact same thing as well. Delta audibly said that she didn't like multiple people in the Kado organization. Victor himself, he's pretty much planning and scheming for himself. And we understand from the Boruto manga, the people who did actually read the Boruto manga, there's a lot of other people in the Kado organization that isn't necessarily 100% faithful to the Kado organization. Now, a couple of other things that I do want to talk about, I'm pretty sure you guys seen by the actual videos or the clips in this particular video right here. Kawaki was actually shown for the first time in Jump Festa, which is absolutely insane. They put out like a 1-minute clip. I'm going to link the full clip in the description below so you guys can possibly see that if you guys do want to. But I'm not going to lie to you guys. The same thing in terms of the design of Delta. What we seen in the opening of Kawaki last week, it doesn't do any justice to the design of Kawaki. Now, just to put out the elephant in the room, this clip right here is specifically built to make Kawaki look good. So because of that, we can't necessarily expect Kawaki to look this good in every single episode that he is involved. This right here is definitely a very big step up, and it does coincide from what we've seen with the design of Delta. So I definitely do expect Kawaki to look a lot better than what he did in the Boruto opening. And of course, one of the things that I do want to point out is we've seen Kawaki activate the Karma Seal, which is absolutely insane. I didn't necessarily think they'd give us all of that off the rip. And of course, I didn't necessarily expect the clip from Kawaki, period. But regardless, that right there was definitely a very well received surprise. And I'm pretty sure you guys loved it as well. Now, I do want to point out there's a lot more announcements at the Jump Fest, not necessarily anything too groundbreaking, anything like that. I'm probably going to cover them a little bit more during the week. But as of right now, we understand today right here is definitely a very big day. And a lot of the YouTubers right now are working overtime, mainly because a very important Boruto episode came out, and of course the Boruto manga, which is also a very important Boruto chapter, actually did come out today. But let me know what you guys think about this episode in the comment section below, and of course give me your opinions on the designs of the characters that we did see in today's episode, and of course the designs of Kawaki as well. More importantly, the two that I'm very interested to see what you guys' opinions are going to be Delta and Jigen, mainly because what we did see in the preview didn't necessarily look very good from those two, and I think in this particular episode as a whole, they definitely stepped up the designs. And I can't necessarily guarantee you guys anything. Of course, nothing is ever guaranteed, but my goal is to actually have the chapter review up by at least, I'd say, 7 o'clock. I know it's a little bit later, but I do want to give this video a little bit more time to breathe. But regardless, you guys should actually be expecting that if everything definitely does go to plan. But it's me, your boy Baara B, and we out.
It's a knife.